All right. Hi, Hannah.
Hello, good morning.
I'm so excited because today I have Hannah Nieves of HN Haus. She is a PR and visibility specialist, and she is the PR advisor inside of the Limitless mastermind, which has been so much fun. How are you today?
I am so good. It's a beautiful day. I'm happy we're having this conversation. I have my coffee. It's going to be a great day.
Yes. So I don't know if you know, but the women inside of the mastermind have had amazing results since you've been working with them.
Yay.
Like one of them has pitched to like 10 podcasts, gotten on 10 podcasts. They've gotten into magazines, and just for everybody listening, like the women who went into inside of the mastermind like had no experience with PR and have small followings. Small meaning like maybe 1,000 to 2,000, maybe a couple more. So it's amazing that they've been able to achieve these results. So today I wanted to talk about a little bit about your story, how you got here, and then who should be using PR and when to start it,
Mhm.
especially if you have a small following. Because I feel like PR is very intimidating if you don't actually know the
Yes.
proper procedures and protocol and strategy to get started.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm excited. It's going to be a good
Yes.
conversation.
So tell us about what you do, kind of like where you started and how you kind of ended up here.
Yeah. So, like many probably listening to this, right? I came from the corporate world, had the vicious cycle of burnout, loved
Yeah.
the work that I did, but, was in that hustle culture. So, I actually started my business from burnout, which was over 3.5 years ago almost. And it's wild because since then it started as a one-woman show, AKA me. And now we have three companies, which is pretty wild. So, we have HN Haus, which is our community network for women, multi-passionate women. And then we also have HN Consulting. That's where we'll do the done for you work. And then we also have this Hudson Studio, which is our photo and event space in the Hudson Valley. So we do a lot, but it's all kind of centered around the idea of redefining the way that we live and work. So it's, yes, we want to build an iconic brand and, yes, we want to have an incredible business, but we also need to make sure that we're building an intentional lifestyle alongside that.
100%. And intentionality is something that we like focus on so hardcore inside of the mastermind because as we're scaling to multiple 6 and 7 figures, like it has
Yeah.
to be done with purpose and intentionality in order to build something that's not going to burn us out.
Yeah. I love that. Love that.
Yeah. And I feel like 3 brands in 3 years is like a very expedited time frame.
I
So
know.
how did you manage that?
I mean, I don't have any gray hairs yet, so we're here. We're here.
Yes.
Although it's one of those things, everyone always asks me, like, how do you do it? And I'm not gonna lie, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It is, it's a lot, but it also takes intention. But I think for me, if anyone here is in, human design, I'm a manifesting generator. So this
Same.
is me at my core. Like the thought of doing one thing just was always so boring to me
I
personally.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can, relate to that. But in terms
Yes.
of like building the three brands, a lot of it came down to, okay, like what are we building? And also like I felt really constricted at one point in the business because everything was me. Everything was me,
Yeah.
which was great. But I wanted this brand to live a lot longer than myself in the event that I ever wanted to sell it, in the event I ever wanted to get a CEO to help run it, things like that. So I had to separate out like certain parts of the business to support the long-term goal of that.
Yes. And speaking of that, I feel like that's something that a lot of people, especially early on in their businesses, don't focus on is long-term planning, which is like the biggest mistake I see.
Mhm.
And that's where the burnout happens. And that's where the I'm doing all the things right. Why am I hating my business now happens?
Yes, it's like you build a digital prison by accident.
100%. 100%. It's like you're trying to escape that 9 to 5 prison of like, my emotions don't matter. Me as a person doesn't matter. And then you just like replace that with your business, which like is like a contradiction within itself.
I
Yes.
see it every day.
Yep. I see it every day too. And like one of the main factors in the mastermind is we long-term plan. And by long-term plan, I know you know this too. It's not by hitting your next goal for like your next 10K or 20K, but like, what are we doing for like the next 5 years? Like, what is like the actual goal we're trying to aim to? Because me and the women in the mastermind, like we're very multifaceted. We have other goals besides our businesses that we want to
Yeah.
achieve. Like, we love our businesses, but our business is not our life. Like, we have other priorities and other things we want to do. Like, I'm also a manifesting generator. Like in the next couple of years, I want to start a nonprofit, and then I want to get
Ooh,
into real estate. Like, I have other things I want to do besides this. So like,
yeah.
how do we start planning for that? And I think PR is a great leadway into that, because PR is like not only an authority builder, but it also generates high quality leads outside of from the traditional engagement that we've been taught online.
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful thing too, because, I also get a lot of people who have, been in their careers for years, decades
Yeah.
in their business. I mean, and I'll have people come to me. I just did the speaking engagement over the summer, and I had people in there who are in their, 40s, 50s, 60s, who are selling companies, who
Mm,
are transitioning, they're starting their nonprofits, they're moving their money in different ways, but some of them have not built their personal brand. And that's where
yeah.
the power PR becomes really incredible, because if you're wanting to leverage your personal brand outside of your business, whether it's i.e. speaking, writing a book, monetizing your personal brand, which you absolutely can, you have to start with that. You have to start with PR, right? And you have to separate yourself. I see a lot of online entrepreneurs who are hiding behind the brands, and you want to almost like build your personal brand like side by side of the brand as well.
100%. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people, something that I see is like disconnect is when you're scaling to like six figures, you're figuring everything out. Like, it's hard, you're setting up
Mhm.
foundations, but then when you're scaling to like multi 6 and 7, then there's like a new level of foundations. And I think there's this concept of like, well, what worked to get me to six figures is just going to work forever. And that's not it. Like, you have to master
Mhm.
now a new level of foundations, and that means a new set of skills. One of those set of skills could be PR, could be personal
Yeah.
branding. But I feel
Yeah.
like that's where people are like, well, I've hit six figures. Now I know what to do and I don't need any more help. I'm like, ugh, if you only knew the kind of
You
help you
need
need
more help.
now. Now you need more help, girl. Like, it's
Mhm.
going to get harder from here.
Oh my goodness. I feel like, even the first 250K in your
Yeah.
business, it is the hardest there too. But when
Yeah.
you're scaling from 250K to 500 to 750, $2 million plus, even higher, it's like there are so many other things. Like it is, I mean, more of like mindset than anything, to be
Oh,
quite honest.
100%.
But
100%.
people think it's just a strategy piece. That's just one piece of it.
Yes, yes. And I kind of have like a bone to pick with anybody online who's like, this is the one thing that'll change your business. I'm like, oh my God, it's like a collection of a million things that are going to change your business, but being
Mhm.
intentional and taking the right steps at the right time, that's like a whole separate another conversation. But
Part two.
yeah, so I mean, clearly you've scaled three brands in such a short time. What would you say were your biggest challenges, or like what kind of imposter syndrome do you face? Do you still have imposter syndrome?
Ooh, such a good question. So yes, I do. And it comes in waves. However, I would say definitely in the beginning stages, right? It comes up a little bit more frequently. I feel like now, after doing this and building these brands and doing all the things, I feel really grounded in who we are and, what we're building and what we're not building. I
Yeah,
think in the beginning stages, it's really easy to get caught up with, oh, well, this person's, scaled to this number, but they have this business model, but I should be doing that. For me,
yeah,
like I had no desire to build a course platform like for our
yeah.
company. It just like didn't resonate with me. I always liked high ticket experiences myself. So I went that business route. But in terms of challenges, I have faced many. So I'm going to keep this nice and short, but the number one thing in terms of challenge actually had nothing to do with business. It was actually personal. No one talks about what you go through on a personal level when you're running a business at the end of the day, when you have team members, you
Oh,
have clients.
100%.
And since I started my business, I lost my biological father suddenly. I lost my grandmother. I had a miscarriage. I had I moved. I lived with my parents. My in-laws lived with me. Like all these crazy things that were like really
Yeah.
impactful, but like no one talks about like how do you actually show up for your business while you're going through these things. And that to me was the hardest part of running my business, because there is a balance at the end of the day. Yes, you can feel into the feminine energy and you can also take time to grieve, but also when you have full-time staff that's relying on you, like you have to be able to show up, you know? So that was the hardest part. I think also, you know, and not necessarily hard, but just like betting on yourself over and over. Like, I think a lot of people, to what you said, think that the investment journey like stops at 6 figures, you know, like,
Yeah.
oh, I did
That's
the
where it
mastermind,
begins. That's where like the
I did the
hardcore investing begins.
exactly. It's like, no, I still continuously join masterminds year over year for that reason, to
Yeah.
expand network. And then I would say the last like biggest, like hardest challenge I would say is definitely the team growth. You know, I went the route of
Mm,
building a larger agency, and then I realized I absolutely hate this. And I had 4 full-time team members at the time, and I was like, okay, this is not the route that we're going. I had to transition team members out. I've had to lay off team members before, I've had to fire team members before, and it is
yeah.
hard. Like, people
Yes.
think it's easy. It is just as hard on the other side of the table. So I would say those are like the big things over the
Oh,
last few years.
100%. And many people don't realize, they're like, oh, well, I don't want to be in a community. I'm like, I don't think you understand how valuable a community is. Like the conversations we have in the mastermind, besides PR strategy and all that stuff,
Mhm.
is like people are dealing with like team member issues, like dissolving contracts, like really high, like legal issues. Some of them are dealing with like,
Yeah.
certain clients no longer meet certain like moral standards for them. How do they navigate that conversation? Like trademark
Mhm.
issues, like these are conversations that like you don't even
Yeah.
think of until you're having to face with them, and then you're like, who do I talk to? Oh wait, I have a community, let me ask them. Right? So it's like, I mean, you're
Yeah.
7 figures and you still join masterminds. Like,
Always. I
yeah,
like, it's funny when I hear the pushback online of like, oh, well, masterminds are this, or I had a bad experience. And listen, everyone has their own experiences at the end of
100%.
the day,
Yes.
right? We're all
Yes.
human. We are all human. Nothing's going to be perfect. However, I have found, even if you're at multiple 7 figures, I'm in a mastermind right now that has people who are doing like multiple over $10 million
Yeah.
a year, right? They still join masterminds. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, that's like the biggest thing. People need to be in the vicinity of other people. And it's not so much of like, what am I learning in this mastermind? Because, for example, like the mastermind I'm in now, like I didn't go in saying, I want to learn the next strategy. No, I
No,
came in
no.
because I was like, I want to really flex the financial investing side of things. I want to like absorb the energy of other people in there. I want to learn from other people. And I also want to expand my network. Like, I pay to be in the rooms
Oh,
every
100%.
year.
And you like, it's amazing once you actually get a community and you start getting connected with people. One, how much more referrals you start getting, how much more
Oh my
contacts
gosh.
you
Yeah.
start getting, opportunities, and also perspectives, right? Like, I can't imagine doing this alone. I can't imagine doing this in a silo without having different points of views and just people that I could like be like, hey, can we have a candid conversation? I really need
Yeah.
advice on this outside
Yeah.
of like a coach.
There was a period of like 6 months, I would say like 5 or 6 months, where I didn't have anyone, because I was trying to figure out like what the
Yeah.
next step was
Yeah.
in the business. And this was after we were going the route of like the agency, and I was transitioning. And at that time, I remember telling myself like, wow, I actually really do need support at this time. And I
Mm,
reflect back, and a lot of the big, I'm going to say issues, but a lot of the big learning lessons and mistakes happened also when I didn't have people around me. And it was probably one of the worst periods in my business. I'm going to be fully
mm.
transparent. One of the worst periods of my business, because I didn't have other people to talk to.
Oh, mm,
So that's perspective right there. Other than that, and that was a really, really great opportunity, because I realized for me personally, I thrive better in communities. So that's why I
same,
join masterminds over and over and over and over
same. And
again.
I feel like manifesting generators, like we like thrive off of people, so we need that
Yeah.
constant back and forth. So it's not even
Yeah.
so much as like teach me something, but just like talk to me. Like let's share
Mhm.
ideas. Like that's when I get like my biggest aha moments. And I have to agree, even like me for the last 2 years, like I've constantly had some kind of community in sorts. And I feel like
Yeah.
because that's how I've been able to scale to like 500,000 in 2 years, is because I like
Powerful.
intentionally set myself up for success and didn't waste time being like, well, let's try to do this by myself. And I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, I can't imagine doing that. That sounds like a headache.
I know. It sounds horrible.
That sounds horrible. Oh my god. So moving into how to actually get started in PR. First of all, like,
Mhm.
I feel like there's a lot of myths of what PR is, and especially
Mhm.
if you have no experience in it and you have a small following and you don't want to constantly just like and post, in Instagram, but
Mhm.
you really want to build a business and a company that has authority and generates leads evergreen. Like, how do you get started with that?
Ooh, so big things are, PR in its truest form. A lot of people think it's just, pitching the media, getting featured in Forbes, right? There's so many facets to PR. I think of it more as a reputation builder. So
Yeah.
those of you listening probably are already doing elements of PR, right? Like responding to comments, right? Or, producing content on your own platforms, like your website, or maybe you're sharing social proof. Like those are all pieces like of third party credibility at the end of the day. And really leveraging your thought leadership. So if you're like in the beginning stages, you're like, I don't really know what to do. I'm not quite sure. First off, like take a look at your platforms first. This is a big thing. You want to make sure your offers are solidified before you even attempt to do
Oh,
PR.
100%.
Your brand needs to be solid. You need to have at least a marketing plan in place. And obviously you're selling offers. When you get to PR really helps to amplify all the work that you're doing. So I always make sure, number one, like, what do your platforms look like? If I were to go look at your LinkedIn, your Instagram, and your website, for example, would I get the same information? Would it be reflective of you currently? So go through and do an audit of those platforms, whatever platforms you use. And then from there, get really clear on your goals. Like, for example, like one of our goals for one of our brands is actually not like pitching for traditional placements, it's actually collaborations and brand collaborations.
Mm.
So that's one of our goals there versus my personal brand. Our goal right now is really leveraging the content that I say we own, but content we own to then expand into other arenas like more speaking, eventually a book down the line. So we're setting the stage for when I do write the book, that my audience growth is at a point where it's going to support a traditional book route.
Yeah.
So you
And
really
it's,
want to get clear on the goals.
yeah. So when I onboarded the women, they filled out the PR
Mhm.
onboarding form that then sent to you. And it's funny because all the women was like, oh my God, I've never actually thought about this. Like, what do I want to do in the long term? And it's
Yeah.
funny because like we're building these businesses, but then like what are we building them for? Like what is the end goal? What are we even trying to
Exactly.
do or say here? So all of them were like, oh my God, that was such a fantastic exercise of like me actually having to think about like what am I doing this for? Because I do want to be intentional. And I do want to build something that becomes like a legacy brand, but like,
Mm.
what does that even mean? So with PR, you kind of have to know where you're going in order to like start doing PR, which is like a fantastic second level foundation skill you need to master.
Yeah.
But I think also it's very intimidating because people are like, well, I have nothing to say. Like I'm not
Always.
special. I have like nothing to say. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, here it comes.
And that's like the number one thing I always hear,
Yeah.
right? It's like, why would people care about my story? And it was really interesting because, I was just on a call yesterday. We're talking to this one, client who has, business and client experience, and it was so fantastic. But we found out she actually like really supports like people in the construction industry, which is a massive
Mm,
differentiator. Like I
yeah.
don't know anyone that does like
No.
what she's doing in
Yeah.
that field. And it's like everyone has a unique angle, everyone has a
Yeah.
unique story at the end of the day. So it's like, okay, how can you leverage that? Whether it's talking about like for me, I talked a lot about my burnout history and coming from corporate America, being adopted, all these things, that I had like kind of the odds against me, but I use that in my story. And I think that's a powerful thing because there's so many channels with PR, right? Podcasting, traditional media, contributor writing, speaking, right? But it just depends on like your route at the end of the day. But I really want to highlight that every single person that's listening to this has a unique story, and it's most
Mhm.
likely time sensitive or like newsworthy that could be applied right now.
Oh, 100%. Like even some of the women who were really intimidated, they're like, "Oh my God, podcasting, I've never done that before." So we were like, "We'll start out with lives, collaborate on a live." Like that's PR. That's like getting,
Mhm,
yeah.
mhm. Yeah.
So for like everybody listening, it doesn't have to be like Hannah said, like from day one, you're pitching Forbes. It could literally be you going out, into your community online and being like, "Hey, does anybody want to collaborate on a live?" Right. And
Yeah.
then pitch podcasts or start a podcast. And then little by little, you work up to like the big name magazines.
Oh, absolutely. I started with lives. If you scroll back on our Instagram, we did like an IG live workshop series. We don't do too many now, but it was a great way to connect with people. And I was connecting people all the time. I was like, hey, you want to go to live? Cool. All right, let's do it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I started a podcast actually within the first 6 months of my business, which for most people can feel really intimidating. Like, first
Yeah.
off, who am I to start this podcast? And then what am I going to say? And it's funny when I listen to like the episodes in the beginning, I'm like, wow, that was Hot Mess Express. But let me tell you, I learned some of the best lessons, but we've had this like our podcast since the beginning, and it has been a massive credibility tool. Like
Yeah.
it has opened up doors to conversations I would have not been allowed to have if I didn't have this tool, you know?
Yeah. And one of the things that is like a constant frustration, I feel like when you're scaling to multiple six, and I know
Yeah.
like 100% for the women in the mastermind, is this idea of things take time.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a big topic we've been talking about lately. And I know when you were doing the workshop with the women, you were like stressing, like, listen, this is something you need to devote at least an hour a day to. Like, for you're in this for the long run. And
Yeah.
so, but I think that online, especially on Instagram, it's very glamorized that things happen overnight. And I mean, I've had so many podcast interviews with women this week for the Limitless
Yeah.
podcast, and each one of them was like, I have what I have today because I took the time to build it. But
Oh,
but there's this, like, mindset issue online where it's like, "But it's been 2 weeks and it hasn't happened." And I'm like,
oh,
"Lord child, I've been here 10 years and I'm finally here." Like,
yeah, I even that's happened to me too, even with my mentor, where he has to check me. And he's like, okay, Hannah, I've been doing this for 15 years,
yeah,
right? Like, or you've only been doing it for X amount of years. Like, you have to give it time, not just 6 months,
100%.
not just a year long, like years. Even like building generational wealth takes years, right? Like, I see like the biggest mistake that I see that happens a lot online is that people get really bored really
Mhm.
fast in their business, or they, for example, something goes wrong, they burn it all to the ground. Like you have to give it time. It's going to unfold. Like for me, even me now, like I am not even worried about these short-term sprints. Like my eyes are on like that 5, 10 year vision. I can see it so
100%.
clearly. And that's all
100%.
I care about. Like I don't care about the next, like, short-term launch schedule, things like that. Of course, it's important. It gets us there, but I'm focused on that.
Oh,
That's the end.
100%. Oh, 100%. And in the mastermind, like we did the exercise because right now it's December. We were sales planning for the entirety of next year. And so when I
Mhm.
told other people that, they were like, how do you know how to do that? I'm like, well, first of all, I have corporate experience, so I know how to do this. But also,
Yeah.
like, this is like literally how corporate brands plan. They're like, okay, what are marketing goals? What are sales goals for the next year out? So December
Mhm.
2021, they know what they're going to be doing December 2022 already. And like that's actually how you long-term plan. Like that to me is a short-term plan. A year is a
Yeah.
short-term
That
plan.
is a short-term plan.
That is a short-term plan. And 5 years is maybe like a long term. But online, when I feel like even in one-on-one coaching, when I work with people, they're like, well, next month is already like, I'm already down a little. So like that to me is a failure. I was like, oh my God, that is literally a blip in like the large vast of things. So same with PR.
Mhm.
It's like you were saying, like, yeah, like you may send 10 pitches and you don't get a single reply back or a yes, but like that doesn't mean it's not working or you have to
Oh,
stop trying.
exactly. I was just talking to a friend yesterday who she's a writer for Wall Street Journal, like big publications. And,
Mm,
she was saying, because, freelance writers also like they're pitching the editors for stories.
yeah.
And even freelance writers have to consistently pitch to get, their pitches, approved and things like that. Like I'll give you an example. We had a client that was featured in Oprah's Favorite Things. We pitched them in January. I think we heard back in like April or May of that year. The piece didn't go live until December. So just to give
Yeah.
you an idea, like, everyone wants to race to these, big publications and hoping it's going to be like in 30 days. Like, if you're the higher the organization or the higher the media outlet, the longer it takes.
Oh,
Like in some of
100%.
them, like, yeah, you could have an approval for a piece that's going to go live in Wall Street Journal. You might not see it go live for another 8 months. Like that's just how it works. And you have to get comfortable with it. But of course, there's other like short-term things that you can do, right? Like with podcasting,
Yep.
speaking, and things like that to kind of layer in. But like the media placements are like the long-term goal. It's like the thing you just keep
Yes.
doing and doing and doing over and over and over.
Yes. And I think that's how you said is how you actually got invited to Nectar Island, is like you updated your PR page like literally every single week, month, year, slowly by slowly. And then one day this thing appeared.
Yeah. So it's funny that the Nectar Island trip, I remember this was actually October of 2021. I got an email that like the subject line was just Nectar Island with a question mark. And I was like, listen, I know what Nectar Island is, but
You're
I don't
like,
know
this
what
is a scam. This is a scam.
I almost deleted it. I almost deleted it because I was like, this looks fake.
Yeah.
And turns out actually that invitation, because I asked, the person that invited me, I was like, why'd you pick me? I'm like, first off, it was a group of predominantly all Australians. So I was probably like one of
Interesting.
5 Americans that were there. And I was like, why did I get picked to come here? And it was interesting because when I think about it now, like, so I had like the person that was running it, I had her on my podcast a year prior. And I just stayed in contact and just built a relationship, with her team, who I'm actually probably going to see next week in New York. And they're from Australia. And we just built a relationship. And at the end of the day, like that's everything. It's all about relationships. Every PR opportunity for me personally, like over time, came from then relationships that I've just been building over the last few years. The same way that you build, relationships with clients. It's the same principle.
100%. I think also something that really like bugs me in the online space is when people automatically just see people as price tags and they don't actually see them as relationships. And
Yeah.
I like all these successful entrepreneurs that I know is because they focused on relationships over sales.
Yeah.
Right? Because relationships will lead to sales, but I oftentimes, especially when clients are newer in their journeys, they'll be like, well, I've been engaging with this person and they still haven't converted. I'm like, that's not the point that we're trying to that's not the point of what we're doing here. I mean, it is, but it isn't, right? So it's really first about relationship building, which is PR, which is, I feel like another level in that second level foundations that you need to master is now securing long-term relationships, because you truly never know how they're going to pan out. Like you got an invite to Nectar Island just because like off of a relationship you made like a year ago. Like that's insane.
Yeah. And it's all about like, yes, creating strategic relationships, but also just being authentic at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like I never go into, these types of partnerships or opportunities to think like, oh, what am I going to get from this? No, like I go in and I deliver the same amount of value. I'm like, what do you need?
Yeah.
I got you. Like, do you need to jump on a call? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, if you give, you will get in return tenfold, always.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the biggest thing is a lot of people go in with like this one-sided mentality of like, what can I get from this conversation?
100%.
What can I get from this partnership? And you have to release that. Even if you're listening to this and you're in a mastermind, right? Like give as much as you're taking from that mastermind, right?
Yeah.
You'll get the most out of it.
Oh, 100%. I'm a firm believer that like the more like income follows impact. So if you have, yes. And I truly like, people say like, oh, it's not about the money. Like, obviously it's about the money. We need to live.
We need
but
to
like,
survive, people.
Yeah, we need to survive, especially in New York. but like my first priority is always like impact. It truly stems from impact, because I know when I have the greatest amount of impact, that's when I feel most aligned, when I feel like most like fulfilled, and like the money always follows. But it's like that unwavering trust that like if I give my all, then all will come back to me.
Ooh, that was good. That was a mic drop. That was good.
So I wanted to ask you 2 questions because I know we have to wrap up here. What is so in your 3 years, because you've been through hardships and you've built something amazing through that, what is something you no longer value that you used to in the beginning?
Oh, I love this question so much. I think for me, and it's not the money. That's not the right answer there, but it's more so I don't chase the top line sales and revenue. I look at profit. I think in the beginning I was, and full transparency, like what you see most of the time online are sales numbers, right? Like I had this $180,000 month, right? But it's probably a sales month. They probably like, sold their mastermind and whatever. Sold,
and then it's a payment plan of like 8 months. So technically, yes.
So, I think that skews a lot of people. And, for me in the beginning, I kind of took that to heart and thought like, oh, wow, when I get to that point, like I'm going to feel different. And
everybody thinks that everybody thinks that all of a sudden you're going to have these, like, you're going to feel like bejeweled and sparkled all over. And I'm like, you're really not.
No. And I think that's like the biggest thing is I just don't chase that. Like I am
Yeah,
I'm not chasing. I am building a brand. I'm building a brand that's much bigger than myself. And that's
100%.
what excites me. And it's a brand that, is going to be like partly in the online world, partly not in the online world. And it's like
Yeah,
a beautiful experience. And it's, for me, I just don't chase those things anymore. Like for me, it's more about profitability. I don't need the biggest team. I don't need all the flashy things, at the end of the day. It's all about simplicity. And I think, in the beginning of business, I tried to overcomplicate things by doing too much. And for me, my time is everything. Like my
100%.
time, 1000%, my boundaries are everything. I don't care how much money I'm making. If I cannot live my life, it's not worth it for me, like at
Oh,
all.
100%.
And I've learned that the hard way. I say that from experience. I've learned that the
Yes.
hard way. So
I
yeah.
find that like finding your lane and staying in it and putting your blinders off is 100%.
Yeah.
One of the women in the mastermind, one time we were having a conversation, she's like, so I want to do this group program, and because I come from corporate marketing, I'm just taught to question everything, right? So like question
Mhm.
everything to death. Because that's how they teach you. And I was like, okay, so why do you want to do that? And she's like, well, I just feel like it's like the next thing to do. And I'm like, okay, but like why? Like I want an answer from you. And she was like, well, I just feel like it would be good for revenue. And I'm like,
You're
that's
going
not
to
an
be bored
answer.
real fast.
I'm like, and I was like, that's not a good answer. Like, I want like a legitimate answer. And then I was like, why don't you take the next 24 hours, think about it, and came back to me. So she came back to me and she's like, okay. So I thought about it, and you're right. I absolutely loathe the idea of doing a group program. And I was like, and why did you make that decision? And she said, well, I just feel like everybody online is like, okay, well, if you want to make X amount of money and have X amount of time, then like logistically, like you need to have a group program. And I'm like, okay, but what do you want to do? What actually feels good to you?
Mhm.
And she's like, yeah, I think I was just kind of like not thinking and just doing what I've been hearing and been told without actually listening to like what I want to do and thinking about like what is
Yeah.
right for me. And she was like, so thank you so much for like forcing me to think about that. So like that is an example of how we're like intentionally building something that is profitable, that is long term, because we're thinking about you and what you actually want versus what like the masses and the
Yeah.
noise is saying.
I love that. Ooh, so good.
Yes. And then the last question, what do you value now that you used to not value?
Mm. Well, it's not that I didn't value it, but I think for me personally, and I share this very vulnerably as well.
Yeah.
I recently went through a miscarriage that I openly shared to my email list, and now openly sharing with this community here. And it's one that, whether you want kids or you don't want kids, it's
Yeah.
all good, but like it rocks you.
Oh,
And
100%.
it's either you've been through it or someone that's been through it, or you've had a family friend member, whatever it is. And I think for me, it was the biggest eye-opening experience for so many things, from the way that I was valuing my time to my boundaries in my business to like so many different things. But if I didn't go through that, I would have not been able to create the space that I needed to set
Mm,
myself up for that, because I know that time will come. And for me, after that experience, like everything came back to my family and my time.
yeah.
And it was like the biggest realization, like, yes, I know all these things of not trading time for money, but it was more of, no, we're putting pedal to the freaking metal of really building these assets up in 2023 to support that. Because at the end of the day, and I'm sure you can relate to this and your listeners as well, is that like, I'm not going to be on Instagram in probably 20, 30 years, like
Oh my
showing up
God,
on
that sounds like an
Instagram
absolute
stories.
nightmare.
And
Oh no.
for me, especially coming from corporate America, it's so easy to get in the kind of like hamster wheel of like, okay, I want to make $100,000 this year. This means I have to charge XYZ. I have to trade X amount of time to get that
Yeah.
100,000. So that was the biggest kind of realization of like, no, how can I build assets that are going to give me that $1,000,000 where I don't have to work as hard for it? And that was like that like catalyst moment for me.
Yeah.
So
It's
yeah.
unfortunate that like that perspective doesn't come unless something happens to us. So I was the other day I was interviewing a woman who owns a pastry business. She's a pastry chef, and she owns her own business. And
Yeah.
she during the global pandemic was like in her early 30s and had breast cancer. And
Wow.
that, so like the combination of all those three things, so like navigating business in a global pandemic while suffering from breast cancer, she's in remission now, she's great, but she was like that was the thing that put the pedal to the metal for her foundations to be like, yes, I knew I wanted all these things, but now I actually want to do them. Now I'm going to do them because that experience taught me that like her time and the space that she wants is like, and her health is more important than everything else. So unfortunately, like, we know these things, but unfortunately, unless we have that perspective shift, it's not enough to put the pedal to the metal, like you said.
Yeah. Ooh, that gave me chills. I need to
Yes.
connect with that person.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so over on Instagram at HN Haus, HAUS, we have our podcast, HN Haus Podcast. Tons of free content over there. Shoot me a DM. I'll probably voice memo you back. But thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Thank you.